The stars were silent. One by one, humanity's colonies went dark. At first, it seemed like accidents. A communication relay stopped sending signals. A transport ship failed to arrive. Families waited for news, but no messages came back. Soon, entire settlements, once alive with voices and laughter, became empty shadows drifting under alien suns. It was not nature that silenced them. It was not chance. Someone had done this. Someone had decided that humanity's reach into the stars must end. The truth came slowly, piece by piece, carried by broken transmissions and desperate survivors. There were flashes of fire in the void, screams that cut off mid-sentence, fragments of reports from military outposts before silence consumed them. The colonies had not simply vanished. They had been destroyed, erased. Across Earth, the news spread like a cold wind. Families cried for children who would never return. Mothers and fathers stared at silent skies, wondering if the stars themselves had betrayed them. In every city, grief mixed with anger. The question whispered from home to home was always the same. Who had done this? The answer came in the form of a message. It was not sent in peace. It was not sent with mercy. It was a command from the alien empire that had watched humanity climb too high. The voice was calm, almost gentle, but the meaning was sharp as a knife. You will remain on your world. You will not leave your system again. The colonies are gone because they were never yours. Reach for the stars once more and you will be erased. The message ended. No further words came. No dialogue. No chance for understanding. Only silence. On Earth there was shock. For a brief moment, leaders and citizens wondered if this was the end. Perhaps it was better to stay in their cradle, to accept that the galaxy belonged to others. But grief is a dangerous seed, and when planted in human hearts, it does not grow into silence. It grows into fire. The governments met in secret. Their faces were pale, but their voices were steady. The aliens believed they had ended the story. But Earth was not broken. It was preparing. In hidden shipyards above the planet, massive shadows were born. Warships unlike anything humanity had built before. Their hulls were scarred with names of colonies lost to the void. Each ship carried more than weapons. It carried memory. It carried wrath. Children in schools whispered about the fleets gathering in orbit. Workers in factories pushed machines harder, knowing every bolt and plate they forged was part of a greater revenge. Families who had lost everything clung to the idea that justice, even in the cold vacuum of space, was possible. Night after night, the skies above Earth glowed faintly red as the ships came alive. Their engines lit like fire in the darkness, casting long shadows across the clouds. To those on the ground, it was as if the heavens themselves had awakened. Still, no word was sent back to the aliens. No threats, no promises, no declarations. Humanity had learned something about its enemy. They believed in fear. They believed silence was enough to kill hope. But Earth understood something greater. Silence could also be a weapon. The first soldiers to step aboard the new fleets felt the weight of history on their shoulders. They carried photographs of lost families, recordings of voices now gone, letters never delivered. They were not going to defend what was left. They were going to answer, and yet fear still lingered. The alien empire was vast, ancient, and merciless. Entire civilizations had been erased by their hand. To rise against them was madness. To strike back was to invite destruction. But humanity has always lived with madness. It has always chosen to climb where it was told not to. It has always built fire in the places where only darkness ruled. The aliens had destroyed colonies, but in doing so, they had done something far worse. They had united Earth. The night before the first fleet launched, Earth stood in silence. Cities dimmed their lights so people could look up at the sky. The stars seemed brighter than ever, not as distant dreams, but as battlegrounds waiting to be claimed. In that silence, no words were needed. Every heart carried the same thought. The colonies were gone. But humanity remained, and humanity would not forgive. When the fleets finally moved, they did not move like prey fleeing into the dark. They moved like predators rising from the deep. Engines roared against the silence, breaking it apart. Warships spread their wings of fire, each one carrying the weight of billions. And still no message was sent to the aliens. None was needed. The hook ends with the fleet crossing into the void, their weapons armed, their lights glowing like burning eyes. The narrator's voice falls quiet, leaving only a question hanging in the air. Would Earth's wrath be enough to face an empire that ruled the stars? Or would humanity's story end like its colonies, swallowed in silence? The fleets of Earth were ready, but the enemy was still a shadow in the dark. The people had seen only fragments of their cruelty. Burning colonies, broken signals, dead silence where once life had been. Yet to strike back, humanity needed to know who they faced. Slowly, through stolen transmissions and captured fragments, a picture began to form. The enemy was old, older than human history. Their empire stretched across thousands of stars built on conquest and silence. They were known by many names in the whispers of smaller species. The erasers, the quiet masters, the ones who leave nothing behind. To them, humanity was not special. Humans were only one more species that dared to climb too high. They believed in rules written by their empire, rules enforced with fire. No one was allowed to rise beyond what the empire permitted. Those who tried were erased. The first clear image of their fleet came through a broken spy drone that returned from the void half-shattered. The recordings showed ships the size of mountains, covered in layers of blackened armor lit by lines of fire across their hulls. They were not graceful. They were not beautiful. They were built only for one purpose: destruction. Their weapons were endless. Their fleets were endless. And above all, their arrogance was endless. For centuries they had destroyed civilizations that rose too quickly. For centuries no one had stopped them. Earth's leaders studied the recordings in silence. Soldiers in the war rooms clenched their fists. The enemy was powerful, but in their power lay weakness. They had ruled too long without challenge. They believed fear alone would keep species on their knees. They believed silence was victory, but Earth had lived through silence before. It had endured loss, famine, war, and still risen again. Where other civilizations had broken, humanity had always rebuilt. The narrator lingers on this thought. The enemy had made their greatest mistake. They had treated humanity like all the others. But humanity was not like the others. On Earth, the mood shifted from fear to fury. The people no longer asked who had done this. They now asked, when will we strike back? In the great shipyards above the planet, the fleets continued to grow. Every day, workers and soldiers looked at the enemy recordings. They saw the alien ships vast and dark and felt no fear, only purpose. Humanity had been underestimated, and now it would rise in a way the galaxy had never seen. The first mission was planned in silence. No announcement, no speech, no cry of revenge shouted into the void. Instead, Earth chose shadows. It would not warn the enemy. It would not reveal its strength. Humanity would answer with the same silence that had killed its colonies, but this time, silence would not mean defeat. It would mean death. The part ends with the image of Earth's fleet waiting in the dark. Weapons charged, their engines burning red against the cold stars. Across the void, the alien empire still believed itself safe. They did not yet understand what was coming. The night was calm above Earth when the first fleet left orbit. To those watching from the ground, it looked like a trail of red stars rising into the sky. Engines burned silently, fire without sound, as the ships broke free of gravity and entered the dark sea of space. Each vessel carried a name that was more than metal letters carved into the hull: Elysium, Dawnspire, Nova, Paris, Horizon Reach. The names were of the lost colonies, carved so they would never be forgotten. Every time a captain spoke their ship's name, they spoke the memory of those who had been erased. Inside the ships, soldiers moved in silence. They were not heroes. They were not legends. They were ordinary men and women carrying pictures of families, recordings of voices now gone, and the weight of anger heavy in their chests. They did not know if they would return, but they knew why they had left. The plan was simple but dangerous. Strike the outer edges of the alien empire, not where they were strongest, but where they believed no one would dare to strike. Cut their supply stations, burn their watchtowers, and erase their silence with fire. The journey through the void was long. Every second the soldiers stared at the stars, knowing the enemy was out there waiting. The enemy ships were vast, armored like fortresses, but Earth carried something heavier than armor. It carried desperation. When the first alien outpost appeared on their sensors, the fleet slowed. It was a station that watched the border, a black tower with weapons covering its skin, built to detect any movement near the Empire's borders. For centuries it had stood untouched. For centuries no one had dared to challenge it. The humans gave no warning, no demand, no words. The first missile struck like thunder in the silence of space. Fire blossomed across the outpost, tearing its armor open, sending fragments into the void. Then came another strike and another. The humans attacked with precision, their weapons cutting through defenses before alarms could even spread. Inside the station, the aliens screamed orders, but their arrogance had left them slow. They had never prepared for an enemy that would strike first. They had always expected fear. They had always expected surrender. In minutes, the outpost was nothing but fire and wreckage drifting across the stars. The humans did not wait to watch it burn. They moved on, faster than signals could spread. The second strike came hours later, this time against a fuel station orbiting a dying sun. The alien workers had no time to react. The station erupted into flames that lit the sky for thousands of kilometers. The third strike came at a listening post. The humans erased it before a single warning could leave its antennas. Every strike carried the same message. Though no words were spoken, Earth had risen. For the first time in centuries, the alien empire faced something it did not understand. The silence it had used as a weapon was now being used against it. Entire posts went dark without warning, but this time it was not their silence. It was humanity's. Among the aliens, whispers began to spread. Some refused to believe humans were capable of such strikes. Others laughed and said the attacks were nothing more than sparks. But deep in the hearts of their commanders, fear had begun to grow. In the human fleet, the soldiers watched the enemy crumble piece by piece. For many, it was the first time they felt something other than grief. They felt power. They felt justice. They felt the weight of vengeance beginning to lift, even if only slightly. Still, no word was sent back to Earth. No victories were announced. Every move was silent. Every victory hidden in the dark. The part closes with the image of the human fleet drifting through the wreckage of another destroyed outpost. Flames burn quietly in the void. Metal fragments scatter like stars, and the voices of the lost colonies seem to echo in the silence. The narrator's voice asks, "What happens when silence answers silence? What happens when fear no longer works?" The answer is simple. Humanity had just shown the galaxy that silence could cut deeper than any blade, and the alien empire had only begun to learn what Earth's silence truly meant. The galaxy had always whispered about the alien empire. It was old, ruthless, and untouchable. Many civilizations had tried to resist, and many had been erased. Entire histories were lost, their names remembered only in half-broken ruins drifting in forgotten systems. No one dared to rise against them because everyone believed resistance was hopeless. But then Earth struck. At first, the galaxy thought it was impossible. Humans were young, fragile, a species that had only just begun to reach beyond its homeworld. Yet stories began to spread. Outposts burning, stations silent, border fleets erased before they could even react. The Empire tried to silence the rumors, but silence had become their weakness. The truth always finds a way to slip through cracks, and this truth carried fire. On worlds far away, alien merchants whispered in fear. In hidden bars and crowded markets, soldiers from other species traded secret tales. The humans have returned fire. Some did not believe it, others laughed nervously. But in their hearts, fear had already taken root. For the first time in centuries, the Empire was no longer the only one spreading silence. Humanity was answering silence with silence. The alien empire began to shift its fleets. Heavy ships moved to the borders. Supply chains grew tighter, and orders spread to hunt the humans. Yet every time they gathered, they arrived too late. The humans struck fast like ghosts in the dark, leaving wreckage before fleets could even detect them. The commanders of the empire grew restless. They had never faced an enemy like this. They had crushed civilizations before, but those enemies had begged for mercy or tried to bargain. The humans sent no messages. They asked for nothing. They demanded nothing. They simply struck, vanished, and struck again. This silence was more terrifying than any words. It made the Empire realize something dangerous. They did not understand their enemy at all. On Earth, the news spread quietly, but the people knew. Families who had lost everything felt a grim sense of justice. They gathered in homes watching the night sky, whispering that their voices were still alive in the stars. The pain of their loss had not faded, but now it burned with purpose. In the fleets, the soldiers no longer felt like prey. They no longer carried only grief. They carried pride. Each battle they won, Each station they erased felt like another promise kept to the dead. Humanity had become something new in the eyes of its own people. Not victims, not survivors, but avengers. The turning tide was not only in battles, it was in fear. Alien captains began to hesitate before patrolling borders. Crews looked nervously at every shadow in the stars. The once mighty empire, built on certainty, began to taste doubt, and doubt spreads faster than fire. Whispers reached neutral worlds, those that had long lived under the empire's shadow. They began to hope, though they did not speak it loudly. Some even dared to believe that if the empire could bleed, perhaps it could fall. The empire answered with rage. It gathered a fleet larger than any seen in decades, its warships black against the stars, their engines burning like suns. It moved to hunt down the humans, to crush them in one final strike, to erase this defiance before it spread. But Earth was ready. The human fleets did not hide this time. They waited in the dark, engines low, weapons armed, their ships carrying the names of the dead colonies. When the alien fleet entered the system expecting to hunt prey, they found something they had never faced before. Prey that had become predator. The battle was brutal. Human ships moved with desperate speed, weaving through the enemy, striking from angles the Empire did not expect. Explosions lit the void. Fire rolled across blackened hulls. And for the first time in centuries, the Empire's ships burned in numbers too great to deny. The galaxy watched in silence. When the battle ended, wreckage floated across the stars. The human fleet was bloodied, scarred, and broken in places, but it had not been destroyed. The Empire had not erased them. The turning tide was complete. Humanity was no longer just a victim of silence. It had become the silence that hunted the hunters. The part ends with the narrator's voice low and steady, describing the galaxy in fear and awe. The Empire was still vast, its fleet still endless, but something had changed forever. The galaxy now carried a new whisper, one that spread faster than fear. Do not touch Earth. Do not test its silence, for silence is no longer weakness. It is the sound of humanity's wrath. The battle that changed everything was over, but its echo still burned across the stars. The alien empire, once so certain, once so unshaken, had tasted something it had not known for centuries: defeat. Wreckage of their ships floated like broken monuments in the dark, while human vessels, scarred but unbroken, drifted silently among them. For the first time in generations, fear had entered the Empire's halls. The silence they once used to terrify others now pressed upon them. The galaxy was watching. Worlds long crushed under the weight of the Empire's rule whispered new words. The humans fight back. On Earth, the news spread in quiet tones. Families who had lost sons, daughters, entire bloodlines wept with grief, but in their grief was also strength. They knew the enemy had learned the cost of erasure. The lost colonies were not forgotten. They had become the fuel of every strike, the voice behind every shot fired into the dark. Still, humanity did not speak to the aliens. Not a single message of peace. Not a single demand for terms. The silence continued, heavier than any weapon, sharper than any blade. For the aliens, that silence became unbearable. The Empire tried once more to gather fleets, but hesitation had already poisoned them. Commanders who once obeyed without question now doubted. Soldiers who once marched with pride now whispered about human ghosts in the void. They feared what they could not predict. They feared what they could not control. Human fleets continued their strikes not out of hunger for conquest, but out of purpose. Outposts, supply stations, watchtowers, all fell into silence. The galaxy began to understand something new. Humanity was not fighting for expansion. It was fighting for memory, for justice, for every voice that had been erased. And then, without warning, the attack stopped. The human fleets pulled back into the shadows of their own systems. The alien empire waited for the next strike, but none came. Days passed. Weeks passed. The silence stretched across the galaxy once again, but this silence was different. It was not the silence of erasure. It was the silence of warning. On their worlds, the aliens began to whisper again, not about their empire's strength, but about Earth's will. They realized that the humans had not stopped because they were weak. They had stopped because they had delivered their answer. The message needed no words. It was written in fire and wreckage. It was written in the ruins of fleets and the ashes of outposts. The message was simple. Do not touch Earth again. The galaxy understood. The alien empire, once so proud, no longer sent its fleets to the colonies of others. Its ships pulled back, its arrogance broken. And in every star system, from the richest trade world to the poorest mining rock, one whisper spread louder than the Empire's commands. Earth is not prey. Earth is not to be erased. Earth is the silence that strikes back. On Earth itself, life continued. Families rebuilt. Children grew under skies still scarred by memory. The people knew they had not defeated the Empire completely. It was still vast, still dangerous, still waiting. But it had been wounded, and that wound would never heal. In the halls of government, leaders spoke quietly of the future. Humanity had not asked for war, but it had learned the truth of the stars. The galaxy was not safe. The galaxy was not fair. To survive, they would need to be more than dreamers reaching into the dark. They would need to be guardians of their own fire. The fleets remained, orbiting silently above the planet. Their hulls still carried the names of the lost. Their engines still glowed red in the night. They did not sail now, but they waited, always ready. Because the people of Earth knew one thing with certainty. The stars would never be safe, but Earth would never again be silent prey. The narrator's voice grows colder in the closing lines, heavy with the weight of memory. The colonies were gone, their voices erased, but Earth had given them an answer. Not in words, not in surrender, but in silence and fire. The Empire had learned, as the galaxy had learned, that humanity's silence was not the end of life. It was the beginning of wrath, and when the stars burned again, every civilization would remember the warning carved into the void. Do not erase humanity, for Earth will strike back.